Well, the details are going to be announced later today, but what we know is that this is a kind of compensation, really, for not getting a formal invitation to join NATO at the NATO summit last year, which Ukraine was very disappointed about, and Volodymyr Zelensky continues to voice Kyiv's frustration at not being formally invited to join NATO, at not being given a timetable for when Ukraine might be able to join the alliance. And of course, these bilateral deals, one was already signed with the United Kingdom, these ones with France and Germany and perhaps some other EU countries are expected to be along the same lines, are nothing like NATO's Article 5. They're not a commitment by these countries to send troops in to come to Ukraine's aid, but they are a sort of formalisation of the continuation of military support for Ukraine in terms of arms supplies and financing Ukraine's war effort. And although there are no binding clauses, they're not expected to be anything binding anyway in these agreements, they are thought of as strong guarantees for Ukraine. Ukraine would like to call them security guarantees. The United Kingdom preferred to talk about security assurances. But in any case, the feeling is that these countries will adhere to them as much as their military industrial complexes permit them to do so, as much as they can produce the weapons and munitions necessary, because they see it as being in their own interests. I mean, if you look at all recent analyses by experts about what European countries need to do in order to shore up their own defences against the possibility of a Russian attack, the amount of money that needs to be spent on that, it's very clear that the much cheaper option is supporting the Ukrainians and letting the Ukrainians do the work and hoping that Russia never gets to a point where it would feel strong enough to want to have any kind of military action elsewhere in Europe other than in Ukraine. The idea and the message that the Ukrainians are definitely trying to sell to all of their Western partners is, let us defeat the Russians before you have to.
Now, Gulliver, this trip comes as fierce fighting is reported this morning in Avdiivka, in and around there. What is the latest in terms of the situation on the ground?
Well, yes, defeating the Russians is not really what the Ukrainians seem to be doing at this very moment. They're very much on the back foot, especially in Avdiivka. I mean, it has to be said, they've held out in Avdiivka, which is a town very, very close to Donetsk, which is the largest Russian-held city in eastern Ukraine. For more than 10 years, actually, the Russians have been attacking that city, and only in recent months they've really made inroads. But now they are inside the town. It's much smaller than Bakhmut, which Avdiivka is often compared to. The situation is similar. The residential areas of the town are pretty much destroyed. The Ukrainians now seem to be surrounded well, no, not quite surrounded, but close to being surrounded. They say that they have started using their secondary routes of communication after the Russians crossed the main road that goes into the town from the town's main factory. The town's main factory, which is a coke and chemicals plant, it was the largest in Europe, provides pretty strong defences for Ukrainian soldiers if they want to hole up in there. And that's where we might be hearing comparisons with Azovstal in Mariupol, that huge factory there that Ukrainian forces continued to defend for months after the rest of the city had fallen. But they might be surrounded there as well. It might even be happening as we speak, because the latest information I have is from yesterday evening, actually. Ukrainian soldiers there describe the situation in Avdiivka as hell. They say that they're inflicting heavy losses on the Russians, including, according to one fighter from the 3rd Assault Brigade, record losses in one day to have inflicted on the Russian forces. But those losses notwithstanding, the Russians massively outnumber the Ukrainians, both in terms of manpower and in terms of firepower. And so there's a great deal of pressure and a great deal of calls actually coming even from inside Ukraine for the Ukrainian forces to withdraw from Avdiivka before it's too late. They certainly have already effected some tactical withdrawals from certain positions. They say that's to more advantageous positions in order to counterattack, but the likelihood of success of those counterattacks, absent massive reinforcements and absent, of course, the munitions that the Ukrainians desperately need, but that they can't get, mainly because the money from the US has been held up, it doesn't look like their chances are very good.